Hello, Virgo. I felt this before I understood it. That is the specific and honest description of how this message arrived. For the Virgo, this reading found, which is you. In the body first and pre-understanding form of something that arrived in the field around your situation with enough weight that the body responded to the weight before the mind had processed what was producing it. What I felt was urgency in the specific and directional form of something moving toward a specific destination with intention and with a reason and with the particular quality of someone who has decided that the distance between where they are and where they need to be is no longer the barrier. It was before the deciding happened. The destination is you, Virgo, and the person moving toward it is coming in the face-to-face form that this reading is named for, in the direct and in-person way of someone who has decided that what they need to say or do or establish between you cannot be said or done or established in any other form than the face-to-face, and who is therefore coming in that form for the big reason that this reading is about to name. This reading has 4 layers. Stay for every single one, because the 4th layer is where the big reason gets specific in the named and complete form that this reading can deliver for the specific Virgo it found, which is you. Virgo, my beautiful Virgo, someone is on their way to you with something to say. That requires the face-to-face welcome and do not go anywhere. The first layer, and this one is about the decision to come face-to-face in the specific and significant form of what it takes for someone to decide that the face-to-face is the necessary form for what they need to do rather than any of the other forms. That the doing could take in the more comfortable and less exposed forms that do not require the specific and particular vulnerability of being in the same room as the person you are saying something to in the full and unfiltered form of face-to-face. Whew. Because here is what face-to-face means. In the specific and honest form of what it requires of the person choosing it over the other available forms of communicating what needs to be communicated. Face-to-face means no buffer. In the specific and exposing form of communication that cannot be revised, after it has been sent, in the editing and reconsidering form, that the written forms of communication allow for, before the sending commits to whatever form the message was in when the sending happened, without the possibility of revision after the sending had committed to the form it took. In face-to-face, the words arrive as they form, in the raw and unedited form of something expressed in real time, without the composing and revising and reconsidering that the other forms of communication allow before the expression commits to whatever form it has taken, in the real time and no buffer form of face to face, and the reaction is immediate. In the specific and exposing form of something that cannot be managed, in the response crafting form of a reaction given time to be shaped before it is expressed in the considered and edited way of a response that was not immediate, but that arrived after the considering, that produced the considered form rather than the immediate and unedited form. That face to face produces in both people at once. Someone chose this form for what they need to do with full knowledge of what it exposes in the choosing and coming form of someone who decided that the no buffer and the immediate reaction and the real time and unedited form of face to face is what this specific communication requires, rather than any of the buffered forms. That would be more comfortable and less exposing and still insufficient for what needs to be done between you and this person. In the face to face, they are choosing. Spirit is showing me why they chose it, and I want to name the why. Before the second layer delivers the big reason itself in the full and specific form that this reading can name. They chose face to face because what they need to establish between you and them requires the presence of both people in the same room at the same time for it to be established in the full and real and settled form that the establishing requires, rather than the partial and uncertain form that the other forms of communication would produce for something that needs the full and real and settled form of establishing that only face to face provides. Whew. The second layer, stay with me, Virgo, because this layer is where the big reason gets named in the specific and direct form that the title is promising as what this reading delivers for the specific Virgo it found. The big reason is not one thing. It is three things connected to each other in the simultaneous and building form of a conversation that has multiple layers, and that requires the face-to-face to deliver all three in the full and connected way that only the face-to-face allows. The first part of the big reason is a question in the specific and direct form of someone who has been carrying a question in the interior and unasked form for the full period that preceded the deciding to come face to face, and who has decided that the face to face is the only form in which the question can be asked in the direct and receiving an answer form that the question requires of the asking. The question is about where you stand in the specific and needing to know form of someone who has arrived at the point where not knowing is more uncomfortable than the asking. even in the face-to-face form, that the asking is taking in the coming and in-person way of someone whose need to know has finally exceeded their comfort with not asking. The second part of the big reason is a declaration in the specific and saying it out loud form of something that has been interior, and that the face-to-face is the vehicle for, in the expressing and finally saying form of something that could not be said in any other form than the face-to-face, because the saying requires the presence of the person it is being said to, for the saying to land in the full and real and received form that declarations require of the saying and the receiving and the being present for both, that only face-to-face provides. And the third part of the big reason is the most significant. In the specific and arriving form of what this entire reading has been building toward, for the specific Virgo, it found the third part is a decision that is being brought to you in the face-to-face and in-person form of something that requires your presence and your voice and your response in real time for the decision to be made in the full and complete form of something decided rather than still deciding in the partial and incomplete form of something that has not yet been brought to the person it requires for its completion, which is you. They are coming with a decision that needs you in the face-to-face and real-time form of the completion it requires before it can be the settled and made decision it is coming to become in the arriving and in-person form of what is approaching right now. For the specific Virgo this reading found, and all three, the question and the declaration and the decision, are connected in the building and simultaneous form of a conversation that needs all three to be complete, and that the face-to-face is the container for, in the only form that works way, of something that requires the presence of both people in the same room at the same time for all three to arrive and land in the full and real and settled form that the face-to-face makes possible, and that the other forms of communication cannot provide. The third layer, stay with me, because this layer is the roadmap for the face-to-face itself in the day-by-day form of what to watch for as the coming approaches and then arrives and then happens in the full and face-to-face form. For the specific Virgo this reading found, watch for this today, a signal in the specific and small form of something that indicates the coming is closer than it was before today, a message that has a different quality, an energy that is slightly changed from the usual energy, a sense of something approaching that arrives in the body before the mind has identified what is producing it. The way the urgency arrived for me, before I understood what it was, in the body first and pre-understanding form of something real and close. Watch for this in the next 48 hours. The contact that arranges the face-to-face in the specific and logistical form of something being set up for the meeting that this reading is describing as approaching within 48 hours of right now for the specific Virgo this reading found. And within the 72 hours that follow this moment, the face-to-face happens or its arrival is confirmed in the specific and knowing it is coming form of something whose timing has been established, even if the happening itself is slightly beyond the 72-hour window for the specific Virgo whose situation this reading found and is delivering this message for within 72 hours. You will know that the face-to-face is coming with the question and the declaration and the decision that this reading named as the big reason for the coming that the title promised and that this reading has been delivering layer by layer for the specific Virgo it found. Now I want to speak to something that I feel very clearly in the energy of the Virgo reading this, and that deserves the honest and direct address. Some of you are feeling nervous in the specific and pre-encounter form of someone who knows something significant is approaching and who is already in the specific tension of the pre-arriving period before the significant thing has arrived in the full and happening form that the approaching is approaching toward. The nervousness is appropriate. I want to say that directly without the dismissing or minimizing of something that is real and present in the interior of the Virgo reading this as a legitimate and proportionate response to something significant approaching in the face-to-face and big reason form that this reading has been describing. The nervousness is the body preparing for something that matters in the specific and intelligent form of a system that mobilizes. When something significant is approaching rather than the ordinary things that do not require mobilizing because they do not matter in the same significant and mobilizing form, that this approaching face-to-face matters. For the specific Virgo this reading found, let the nervousness be what it is in the preparing and intelligent form of a body getting ready for something that deserves the getting ready rather than fighting the nervousness in the specific and costly form of someone who tries to manage the body's intelligent preparation into something calmer and more managed that is less useful than the specific and preparing form of the nervousness itself. The fourth layer, the most personal and the most important, I feel a question forming in you as the fourth layer arrives. The question is not about the face-to-face or when it is coming or what the question and the declaration and the decision will specifically contain in the full and happening form of the face-to-face itself, uh, the deeper question is this: how do I want to be when the face-to-face happens in the specific and intentional form of someone who is thinking before the significant thing arrives about how they want to show up in the no buffer and real time and immediate reaction form of face to face that does not allow for the composing and revising and reconsidering that the other forms of communication allow. I want to answer that directly in the most useful and honest form available, exactly as you are, um, in the specific and particular form of the Virgo who is reading this right now, in the nervous and preparing and present form of someone who knows something significant is approaching and who is in the specific and honest interior state of that knowing. Not the managed and composed form of the Virgo at their most polished and most presenting the exterior version of themselves, but the actual form of who they actually are in the specific and present way of someone who is in the real-time form of their actual experience rather than the managed and composed form that the exterior presentation takes when the composing is what the Virgo is doing, rather than simply being the person who is coming face to face, is coming for the actual version, not the composed one, in the specific and significant distinction between the two that the face to face makes inevitable by removing the buffer that the composed version needs to maintain its composure in the real time and no buffer form of the face to face that is coming. Be the actual version when the face to face arrives in the full and happening form of what this reading has been describing as approaching for the specific Virgo it found. I want to give you something before this closes. In the permission form that the nervous and preparing Virgo reading this specifically needs before the face-to-face arrives within the 72 hours that are already counting. Permission to be nervous and present and actual in the full and unmanaged form of someone who is in something significant and who shows up to the significant thing in the honest and prepared and nervous and completely themselves form that the face-to-face deserves from the specific Virgo. It is coming for who you are protected, and they are coming with a question and a declaration and a decision that requires your presence in the face-to-face and real-time form of something that could not be done any other way for the specific Virgo. This reading found today before the face-to-face arrives within 72 hours that are already counting. Take gentle care of yourself, my beautiful Virgo. They are choosing the face-to-face because what they have to say deserves to be said, looking at you directly in the full and present form of something that could not be said any other way, drop a comment below and tell me, have you been sensing that someone needs to see you in person before something can be resolved? Because if you have, your sensing is accurate, and this reading found you at exactly the right moment. And if this landed somewhere real, subscribe, because there is more coming. For the Virgo, who someone needs to see face to face, for the big reason that this reading just named